Yes, MTV's Kurt Loder is 80 years old now, but keep in mind this, that in the mid to late 80s, he was already way older than we thought he was back then. Like I think in 88, he was like 42 or 43 years old. When you were watching Kurt Loder do the news on MTV in the mid to late 80s, did you think he was already in his 40s? You see, he was on a station that was geared towards younger people, that had young VJs, that had young hosts, and he was one of the older guys on that. So the fact that he's 80 now is not as surprising when you think about it from that perspective. But yeah, the guy who we watched give us our music news when we were teenagers is fucking 80 years old. That video that this person is leaving this comment on was done by a friend of mine named Dan Reagan Comedy, and he does a lot of Gen X comedy, and I really enjoy his content. If you guys aren't following him, you should be following him. The thing about that video that really hits me is not the fact that Kurt Loder is now 80. It's the fact that when we were teenagers in the 80s, hang on, teenagers now in 2025, talking about the 80s is the equivalent of us being teenagers in the 80s talking about people from the 40s. That's the one that really gets me. Think about it. Teenagers today talking about people from the 90s is like us in the 80s talking about people from the 50s. And when we were teenagers and we were talking about people from the 50s, we were talking about people that were, in middle age and getting up there for us being teenagers, but not like the people from the 40s, because when we were teenagers in the 80s and we were talking about people that were alive in the 40s, at that point in time in the 80s, they were old as fucking dirt, right? That's us now. If there's a 15-year-old kid in 2025 talking about people who were teenagers in the 80s, that is the equivalent to us being teenagers in the 80s talking about people who were teenagers in the 40s. That's fucking insane to me, that's the group that we are now. When I think of 20 years ago, I don't think of 2005. My brain goes to the 90s. Nope, that was 30 years ago. That was over 3 decades ago. It is insane to think that that's how detached time-wise we are from teenagers. My son, who's going to be 14 years old in December, looks at me as a teenager in the 80s the way I looked at my fucking grandparents or other people of that time that were teenagers in the fucking 40s. People that were born in the fucking 30s. Think about that. If you were born in the 1970s, that's the equivalent. A teenager today looking at you being born in the 1970s is the equivalent to us being teenagers in the 80s looking at people who were born in the fucking 30s. When the fuck did that happen?